Madeline, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining today. We're very excited for this session today. This is one out of several Semantic Layer webinar series that we here at Enterprise Knowledge are hosting. And the purpose of this series in particular is to hear directly from our friends and partners outside of EK who are leaders in the industry. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce the moderator and the panelists for today's session. Jeff Jonas sends his apologies for his absence. He is unfortunately not feeling well. Lulit Tesfaye will be acting as our moderator today. She is our partner and vice president of EK's Knowledge and Data Services, and she's currently focused on employing practical AI and semantic capabilities for optimizing organizational knowledge, data, and information assets. I'll introduce our three wonderful panelists next. Polly Alexander is the Director of Metadata and Taxonomy for WebMD Ignite, with expertise bridging the fields of knowledge management, AI, and machine learning. Malcom Hawker is a former Chief Product Officer and Gartner analyst with over 25 years of experience across the fields of data strategy, master data management, and data governance. And finally, Mohammed Aaser, Chief Data Officer of Domo and former Chief Data Officer of McKinsey and Company. So we'll go ahead and get started now, but we'll make sure to leave time at the end for questions from the audience. So please save your questions until then, but feel free to submit them in the question box throughout the session. And I'll be monitoring that question box as well as the chat and facilitating the Q&A at the end alongside Lulit. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll turn it over to you, Lulit.
Thank you, Madeline. Welcome, everybody. Thank you. I have been looking forward to this conversation for some time now. Polly, Malcolm, Mohammed, thank you again for joining us. So before we jump in, I would like to take a moment to introduce and define a semantic layer. For those who may not be familiar, semantic layer is a standardized framework. It's not a product, it's not one technology. It's a combination of solutions and a framework that organizes and abstracts organizational knowledge and data, all your knowledge assets, structured, unstructured, semi-structured, and serves as a connector of your knowledge and information. So it does this by shifting the focus from the physical data itself to descriptive and rich metadata, and allows you to aggregate siloed content from multiple sources without the need to physically migrate or co-locate data in one place. It also allows you to connect and provide structure and context to all types of data by using standard knowledge and organization schemas like taxonomies, ontologies, knowledge graphs, reference data. And in a way, this also gives us the framework that's based on semantic web standards for the semantic web standard side, ultimately facilitating interoperability, which is becoming a big topic in our industry. So our panelists are leading complex and exciting initiatives for their respective organizations in aspects of semantic layer, employing the components, but also overarching knowledge and data management solutions. So I would love to kick us off by hearing from you all about what you're currently working on and what you're seeing in your respective industries within this space. What challenges are you facing in your domain, as well as how could a semantic layer add value to that? Malcolm, I'm going to start with you.
All right, off the bat. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Enterprise Knowledge, for having me. Thanks, Lulit, for having us and for participating and facilitating. Wow, what are we working on? Well, I work for Prophecy. We are an MDM software vendor. I would argue that MDM is a form of semantic layer. It doesn't meet all the criteria, Lulit, that you had shared, but I would argue it is very much a form of a semantic layer. And what we're focused on is trying to make, and this is pretty high level and pretty conceptual, but what we're focused on is trying to make the leap from data management to more knowledge management, and how do we do that, and how do we fill in that gap? right? I would argue that what we're largely doing in most organizations today is data management. And frankly, we could all be doing a better job of that. But this is classic MDM, classic BI, classic semantic layers that are linking tables to like tables together. And it's the way that we've always been doing things. Where we need to get to is more knowledge management. Where we need to get to is the idea that context is critical. Whether that context is being consumed by AI chatbots, whether it's being consumed by AI models as a part of a training process, but the context is important. In the case of MDM, context has always mattered, but we've kind of always just not really managed it that well. We've always known that truth was bound by context, right? And that what's true to a CEO could be different than what is true to a manager of procurement. Both things can be true at the same time. But how do you facilitate and enable the type of knowledge management that would say, okay, this is what's true to this person and this is what's true to this person. They can both be true at the same time. How do we have multiple versions of the truth at play at the same time? The way we do that is by implementing something like a next-gen semantic layer, right? By enabling these capabilities within traditional MDM to acknowledge something that we've always known is true, is that multiple versions of truth can exist at the same time. That's context, and that's what a semantic layer would, I believe, provide.
I love that. Polly, Mohammed, if you want to jump in.
Go ahead, Mohammed.
Maybe I'll just add in a little bit to Malcolm. So Mohammed Aaser, Chief Data Officer here at Domo, and then have led data and analytics roles at enterprises prior to my role here at Domo. And one of the things I'm seeing quite a bit, not just at Domo, but with a lot of our customers as well, is there is this greater need to, really with, I think, the semantic model conversation I feel like I've been having it for the last 5 years as I've gotten closer with knowledge graphs and so on. And I've started my data management journey, really building data lakes, but ultimately not just building data lakes for the sake of building data lakes, but actually to solve different business use cases, whether they be building a customer 360 or a product 360 that ultimately drives recommendation engines or drives what financial advisors see or drive what, for example, how we think about like a product 360 if you want to understand like emissions associated with every single input product that you have, right? There's all these different use cases that can benefit from moving beyond just physical kind of data models into more conceptual. But really the conversation has changed, I would say, in the last year because of LLMs. And in particular, the fact that for most use cases, you can't expect your business users, your consumers, to have to go and link up a bunch of tables and answer questions. You want them to instead operate more at a conceptual level, where the semantic layer, where you've actually defined a number of these concepts. So when you go into Google, for example, and you ask how many calories are in an apple, it knows you're referring to a fruit, and it gives you a couple options saying what types of apples, and they've built an ontology there, so you get a precise answer, a deterministic answer, if you will, to that particular problem or question that you have. And I think the value of a semantic layer now is going to explode and increase dramatically with the ability for consumers to be able to ask that question, to be able to ask questions, and then have that translated down into the logical and then physical kind of representations of the data. They don't need to worry about that any longer. So that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm most excited about. That's what I'm also most excited about to bring to our customers from a Domo perspective. So I'll pause there. Polly, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I come from a little bit of a different perspective, being situated in kind of the healthcare and the healthcare space specifically. So WebMD Ignite is, sort of it's a brand that has been formed in the last year to bring together a lot of different organizations that have, they're all sort of focused on delivering, education to patients, but at the same time doing it in very different ways and having very different metadata schemas and ways of delivering that content to patients. And so, we've been doing a lot of work to sort of unify that. And so using the semantic layer to try and bring a lot of that education together But then at the same time, really starting to focus in on what we call our semantic AI initiatives, where now that we sort of have that ground level and that ground truth set, really being able to look at how do we use AI technology to really support our patients from discovery to recovery. So that is a way to sort of capture that multi-dimensional kind of way of looking at the world and really being able to support our patients. Sort of more recently, we've been trying to really kind of take our metadata layer, harmonize it, so that we can start to look at how we can use more modern technologies like vector search databases and the knowledge graphs and things like that to be able to really make the recommendations that we're making to our patients very targeted, very personalized, in a way that helps them, supports them in sort of picking that next best action. Healthcare and sort of conditions can be really scary for patients, and so we sort of look at ourselves as those advisors, those helpers to kind of not only give you the information, but then to kind of tell you help you figure out what's the next best step for you. And so that's kind of the direction we're going, and the semantic layer plays a very important role in that.
Yes, I am, when I'm listening to these kind of diverse perspectives across the different industries that you come from, and the things that stand out to me from what you've said is that there needs to be the ability to deliver content in different ways, different content to different people in different ways in the way they can consume it. But also, Malcom, I liked how you emphasized how we're moving away from managing data physically to managing knowledge and understanding the truth for our organization. And overall, I think the ability to use modern tools, Polly, you called out, is that flexibility and the interoperability to make your data flexible for the systems of the future. I hear this loud and clear. And I think the core of Semantic Layer for this, what I'm hearing is that it helps solutions understand your domain, your business entities, as well as the truth. Especially, in healthcare, you don't have that much luxury of getting it wrong, right? So this is great. And Mohammed, I want to go back to a point you raised earlier about you've been having this conversation for about over 5 years now. Given especially your role as a CDO that has been in this, in a new role, how do you measure the effectiveness or ROI of the data solutions that you invest in your strategies? Especially when investing in the semantic advanced capabilities. What's been your experience, and what would be your recommendations or considerations there?
What really got me excited about semantic layers from the get-go, and this is now going back at least a few years, was that in order to solve, and this was in a world where you're building a customer 360s, where I came from a financial services background, where you take everything from transactions to call center, conversations, to digital traffic behavior, like what they're doing on your website, to meetings with financial advisors. You take all this data and we build all these models on top of it. And these models would be things around identifying, which customers have a, retention risk, which ones have, potentially opportunity to deepen with, or we can offer more targeted services towards them, and so on. And what I found was that I spent a vast majority of my time, and my team spent a vast majority of their time integrating and reintegrating data, often from similar sources, to power a particular use case. And what I realized is that there's so much time that's spent in that process, in that data integration process. But then in addition to that, as you're going through that process, you start to learn that, in fact, there are many different definitions. What's an active customer? Does it matter what their balance is when they've done a trade? And you find out that there's like 3 people in the organization who know that. And then there's a bunch of reporting that happens on top of it. And so my goal wasn't from the outset to say, hey, we need a semantic layer for our company to solve all these use cases. It was more around, hey, we've got all these use cases where we know that there's an ROI, that if we can reduce or improve retention by this much, it's worth this much to our bottom line. If we are able to improve deepening with our customers, this is what it's worth to us. This is what it's worth to us from a customer satisfaction perspective as well, right? And we can start linking all these together. And so we took that task, that tedious task of having to redo all that data integration and started creating some common data products. Not quite yet that conceptual semantic layer, but I want to just emphasize the point that you do have to start the journey somewhere. You know, you can't start necessarily always with a perfect knowledge graph, but you can work your way towards going from that physical layer to then creating some common data products, so that, you know, some logical data models, so on, so that you can reduce the amount of time you spend on doing those data integration tasks. Now, as I look in the future, and by the way, a couple of key things to keep in mind here is don't boil the ocean, right? Start with what are the key data elements you want to start with. Don't try to build the entire enterprise data model from the start. I've seen some organizations take that approach. It's a very aspirational approach, very inspiring approach, but often I haven't seen them succeed. And so you start with that particular family of use cases in mind, and you start to say, hey, well, actually, I think it makes sense for us to start now investing in building, you know, a conceptual model, a semantic model for our customer 360. And let's start with the data elements that matter the most. And then over time, let's then expand to other domains in the organization. And you can almost start, and that's why I think these semantic layers and data products have so much intertwined, where they can really benefit each other. At the same time, I do think that you have to be thoughtful around when is it worth making that investment. I don't think every problem requires a semantic layer to go solve, but I do think problems where you've got a wide variety of data sources that need to be reintegrated often, where there perhaps is a large customer base using that data. So quality matters to all those people asking those questions and so on. It's not just two analysts using the data, you know, type of thing. Then it starts to make sense to start to say, hey, it's probably worth us investing in improving that over time.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Malcolm, Polly, is there anything you would add to this?
Yeah, I would say,
Where does? Oh, after you, please.
no, well, please go ahead, Malcolm.
We've got a little delay. It's difficult. Thank you. So much to chew on there, Mohammed. It's really interesting. Lulit, you correctly noted at the onset that a semantic layer isn't like it's not like one tool. It's not like I'm going to go and buy my semantic layer and turn it on and I'm done. Although there's plenty of vendors out there that are kind of already pitching that story. Buyer beware, folks. I really see this being at least a 3 or maybe 4 layer cake. Mohammed just touched on one of them, which to me is the base layer, is the integration layer. It's the data virtualization that allows me to connect anything from anywhere, to run a SQL query against a graph data store, a Cassandra data store, and to be able to stop doing all of the wiring for integration. Right on, we absolutely need that. That would be the base layer. I would argue there's maybe even 3 on top of that. I would say that there needs to be a governance layer here as well, and we don't govern knowledge very well. We govern data, and we don't govern knowledge very well. There's opportunities for us to kind of tune the way we think about governance around knowledge. There's a data analysis portion here, right? That we need to run the graphs. We need to maybe even run some custom AI models on the data. Maybe, you know, we need to draw some conclusions based on what we're learning. And then on top of that, I would even argue and take it a step further and to say that on top of all this could be a recommendation engine or recommendation layer. I think LLMs could play a role here. Mohammed touched on this, to be able to say, hey, were you aware that these two things are related that you didn't think were related? Or do you know that this thing is actually impactful to your bottom line or to the effectiveness of your supply chain? And you didn't know that it was effective to your supply chain because it wasn't even in your master data model. So I think all of these things together kind of form what could be a next gen semantic layer. I'm really excited about that stuff. There are people that are talking about kind of the base layer, and that's an important start. Don't get me wrong. You need the plumbing. Most certainly you need the plumbing. But I think the challenge for us here within and across all of our industries is to figure out how to layer in those additional levels on top.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely
Go ahead,
agree
Lauren.
with you there, Malcolm. Sorry, the delay is a little bit weird. Um, absolutely agree with you there. And you know, from my perspective, as I mentioned, we're working on being able to support a patient through their entire journey. So being able to kind of model that journey, being able to handle all the different inputs that you need in order to properly define that journey. You know, you've got a time element, you've got a geographic element, and then you also have sort of the inputs that you're getting from, you know, those personal attributes from the patient as well. You know, what their diagnosis is, what, you know, what their age demographic might be, and things like that that you have to take into account. And so, like, a lot of the work that we're trying to do is, again, as you were saying, we try to get that foundational, you know, data management, data validation correct for defining that. But I think it's really exciting to be able to start to take those models and harness it and join it with LLM technology, you know, and to be able to sort of use those you know, use those capabilities to be able to, you know, get around things like hallucinations and other things like that, especially since in our industry, a lot of you know, especially in the healthcare industry, a lot of our relationships depend on that trust. Specifically that, you know, the information that they're getting is correct, that it's meaningful to them, that it can really help them to sort of, you know, move forward in a direction and make a decision. So yeah, it's really exciting to kind of hear all of you talk about similar things, and kind of learning a lot here today.
Maybe I'll just bring up one point. It reminded me, Malcolm and Polly, on this, right? Which is, you know, Malcolm, you said buyer beware. And actually, that is what I have encountered over the last 3 to 5 years, that there's a promise of a semantic layer, you know, almost of a GUI-like interface where you can go define your business concepts.
Mm-hmm.
You can then go link those to the tables or to other unstructured data sets, other graph data sets, and you can have governance on top of it, and then so on and so forth. And what I have found is that it's actually a lot harder to go implement that in real life, because there really isn't what I call like these studio tools to actually go put this together. It's going, you have to go hire sort of a specialist ontologist who knows the standard. They then need to then link that to your structured data, and they often aren't the best at translating that to anyone who's not an ontologist. They're not, you know, and you have to get buy-in from the organization to go do it. And so when I have to go take this concept and I have to go convince our business stakeholders that we need to go invest in this, I need to show to them that this is going to mean a 10x impact in our productivity as a team. So we'll spend less time on data integration tasks, and at the same time, we're going to be able to answer so many more questions. And here are the applications that we're going to build on top of it. That's so much more exciting. And I'm just reflecting on the language we're using, right? We're talking about, you know, master data management. We're talking about semantic layers. We're talking about physical layer. Like, the reality is, I mean, no one outside of the data world understands what we're talking about. And for us to get buy-in,
Right.
to actually go invest in these things, we've got to somehow make this a conversation that we can get other people on board with. And by the way, we have to get people on board with this who are often not even familiar with what a knowledge graph is or what a semantic. They're really familiar with just tables and logical data models, maybe star schemas. And then we're now saying, hey, no, think about another layer of abstraction on top of it, and how, and for them, they're like, it's even foreign for them. And so there's this piece that we have to do within the data community itself, but then there's another piece we have to do outside, right? And so, anyways, that is a real struggle that I face. I wouldn't say that I think I've solved it, but I'm interested, Lulit, interested in your thoughts on this too. I don't know if it may go into the next line of questions that you have as well.
It's actually, Mohammed, that's a great segue to, you know, a question we get a lot, and I'm sure you hear this too, around pitfalls and why these solutions fail or these projects fail. So Polly, I know you've been successful in developing and implementing semantic solutions in your organizations. Now I would love to shift into, you know, what challenges do you consistently encounter, and what's been working for you to navigate that? And I'll bring this back to Mohammed and Aaser too, but I really would like to start because I know you have a good track record of making this stick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's always been you need to have a good use case. And I mean, you really have to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And is that problem even solvable by a semantic layer? You know, I mean, you kind of have to go through that thought process too. You know, for the most part, once I've had that really well-defined use case, which actually Lulit, you and your team many times have helped me really refine some of those use cases that I've worked on over the years. You know, it makes it a little bit easier to have that conversation. You know, what is the business value? You know, what's business value being, you know, what's important to our executives. But what I found also is that if you have the use case well defined, if you have like a story to tell, it makes it a little bit easier to not have to say things like semantic layer and knowledge graph when you're talking to your executives, and it sort of resonates with them a little bit more. You know, I'm lucky in that I've landed in a company where a semantic layer, a knowledge graph is really well suited to being able to follow an individual along their patient journey and all the different directions that they might have to take along that journey. And I'm lucky in a way because I have other words that I can use rather than semantic layer to really kind of talk about that multi-dimensional element that you need to be able to handle all the different data elements that come into that. So yeah, again, if I had to have one takeaway, it's just be really well defined in your use case and, you know, be able to articulate and tell a story around that.
Polly, if I could, maybe I have one question on that.
Yeah.
What language, what words do you use beyond knowledge graph or semantic web? I asked because I had another friend actually describe it a little bit as like a digital twin, but I don't know if that's the same type of language you use and if it's gotten pickup.
Yeah, so I haven't actually used, I think that I've started to see folks talk about digital twins, but for me, since I'm in a healthcare setting, I say things like connective tissue and things like that to kind of really make that to really make it clear that we're sort of, you know, we're trying to describe things, but then sort of connect things together to really be able to drive people and solve their issues. So I don't know. I think you've given me another suggestion though, because I really do feel like if you're defining that patient, all the personalization elements around them, all the things that are kind of interfacing with them, digital twin seems like a really useful image to be able to kind of say to executives and other folks that you're trying to convince about things. So yeah.
Well, how about rebranding ourselves, right? We're the chief data officers. How about we're the chief knowledge officers, right? Because knowledge gets us closer to the use cases. Knowledge gets us closest to the business. When I was a Gartner analyst, I would hear over and over and over and over the challenge of being able to articulate value, right? The challenge of being able to quantify the value, the challenge of telling the story we're just talking about. When I had my light bulb moment, when I was trying to pitch MDM internally, it happened when I was able to Polly, as you correctly noted, really latch on hard to one use case. And what I did was I provided knowledge. I asked my chief revenue officer, what if I could tell you about white space opportunities you don't know about today in your sales organization? What if I could actually tell you where to go look to sell? Because customer A is buying product A, but they're not buying product B because we don't know those customers are traversing those worlds. And I can tell you where to go look. I can tell you where to go sell. Sign me up. How much do you need? Right? Like, can I cut the check now? Right? And the difference there was I wasn't talking about technology, and I wasn't talking about data management and reducing duplicates and null fields and all of that other stuff, or even the connective tissue, right? Wiring. Mohammed, feel your pain about having to reintegrate. But frankly, on the business side, people don't really care about that. That's sausage making. But the minute you make the jump from how we work and the technologies and data management into something they care about, right? Then it's, oh, let's go. I get it. So
Yeah,
maybe chief wisdom officer or chief knowledge officer. I think I've just found something. I'm going to go make my own role.
I think the challenge with those two titles is you wouldn't come across too humble with either of those. Chief wisdom officer means
Never that being too humble.
the more you know, the more you think you know, the less you actually know, type of thing. You know what I mean? So
I love the philosophy there. That's actually
but
true.
I do like. No, I'm hearing kind of two schools of thought here, right? There is the focus on the business, that problem you're solving. You can get away without saying knowledge graph ontology, semantic layer, but talk about connective tissues, right? Like that's what we're creating or we're solving in this problem. And the digital twin, I think, is in that category of like painting a picture of what this would be like, making it a little bit more clickable, if you will. And then Malcom, I think from your angle, I absolutely see this, that rebranding of the space too is something that as practitioners in this space that we always grapple with, right? Like understanding and explaining. There's always new technology coming up. There's branding, but there's also the actual, like, what am I getting out of this that you get from an executive? So I'm hearing there's, and I absolutely agree with this, that it's crucial to understand the use cases, getting away without saying any of the technology or the solutions. And also I'm hearing a little bit about timing to a certain point of, the specifics of like what you want to go after and the rationale behind investing. Why are we doing this? And I think, and I can attest to this, this is something that we see time and time again. And actually, now that we're on this topic, let's explore this question. Why now? Why is it compelling now to invest in these solutions?
So
go for it, Mohammed.
I'm happy to maybe take a stab at this one. So a good friend of mine, I think we all know him probably pretty well, Juan Sequeira, did some research he published a few months ago. And Juan introduced me to the semantic layer, right, into knowledge graphs in particular. Or maybe it was like around the same time Juan was one of the folks who introduced me. And so what's really interesting is that with the rise of LLMs, I think we're going to see this, we're already seeing this, where people want to be able to ask really any question and get a good answer back, or the right answer as much as possible, where it makes sense, right? There's different definitions for things as we discussed earlier. But what we're finding is that if you don't have a good semantic layer in place, what ends up happening is actually the LLMs are rewriting your questions into these SQL queries. They're doing their best to understand the metadata and do some integration tasks behind the scenes. And more often than not, they're actually making pretty poor analysis, and they're giving results back very confidently. And so there's a huge risk actually of exposing your data to these LLMs to answer questions. And so if the North Star is to say, hey, we want to make information accessible and insights accessible to the entire organization, not only do we want them to be able to ask questions, we want to feed this into models that we want to go build, predictive models. We want to, as Malcom mentioned, give recommendations out. Then it becomes even more valuable to start to say, let's start defining what these concepts are, how they're related to each other, how they're related now to the underlying physical data sets. And let's let that layer of abstraction handle all of those questions. And I think that has been, in the last year, along with the hallucinations that we're seeing from LLMs on their own, the combination of the two are so much stronger together. And I think that's what's reigniting this field, and that research that was done by Juan, I think, has been such a great foundational comparison of like the benefits of what this can provide.
Polly, what do you think about the why now?
So why now? I mean, again, I just to kind of what you said, Mohammed, really resonates with me, where we need to be able to give people the right answer, and with, from the industry that I'm in, we're dealing with a lot of people who in some cases are, maybe they don't quite know what's going on with them yet. They may be searching for a symptom. They may be maybe recently diagnosed, and they're a little worried about being able to find the right information or the right person to go and make an appointment with. I think, again, I think what concerned me about LLMs at the beginning, we didn't really have any controls around them, and people were getting potentially the wrong answer when they would ask it questions. And I think what's really exciting about the addition of sort of the guardrails from a semantic layer, metadata layer, knowledge graph, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly important for us to be able to grow systems that sit on top of this type of technology, especially in healthcare, where it absolutely matters that you're precise and you're correct every single time, because sometimes it can be life and death when it comes to things that are going on in the healthcare community. So I think, it's really exciting for our organization to really, be embracing this and to be able to kind of move forward with building out some projects that are going to marry the LLM with sort of our baby semantic layer that we have in place from various use cases we've worked on over the past couple of years.
So I would completely concur that the why now is most certainly LLMs and being able to operationalize AI at scale in your organization. The fact of the matter is, I would argue most, whether that's 60, 70, 80%, we can argue about that, but I would argue most companies are not going to be building and training their own models, particularly large language models.
Yep.
What they will be using is AI chatbots, co-pilots, smart agents that are deployed in the applications they use all day, every day, whether that is a word processing application, whether it's a CRM, whether it's an ERP. You're going to be interacting with some sort of agent that is analyzing data, making recommendations of data, doing things for you to make you hyper productive. Getting back to the first question about, well, how do you value this? I mean, the value in increased productivity through AI will be incredible for companies that are able to harness it. However, I'm working on an article right now for Forbes. Basically, the working title is the AI governance elephant in the room. And the fact of the matter is when it comes to generative AI and LLMs, these things were built using text data and they're optimized using text data. The data that we have and the data we govern mostly is sitting in rows and columns. It is mostly structured data. How do you get, and this ties back to the research that our friend Juan has done, is how do you tie that data, the information data, sitting in rows and columns and make it usable within some form of a RAG pattern, retrieval augmented generation, where you are in an intermediary step. You're doing some analysis, you're taking data out of the rows and columns and you're putting it into context and you're providing some meaningful insights to the LLMs to stop them from hallucinating, to make the best answer that they can give. Well, the way that you do that is through some sort of RAG pattern and some sort of injection of semantic insights, some sort of injection of context into the process to go from rows and columns into something that an LLM can consume that looks a lot more like text.
Yeah, this conversation is really making me think of a recent discussion that I had with one of our clients where the main question, this was a conversation happening with the analytics team and the information architecture team, and this is usually the push and pull that usually happens within organizations. And the data analytics team is more focused about quick analytics for specific questions, right? That's the biggest focus. But on the other side, the information architecture, the more governance side of the world is, even if we're training LLMs and AIs with these analytic solutions, there are known facts within our organizations. Why don't we feed that to the model? Why do we want AI to go look for fetch for things and get it wrong, right? And that was a very insightful discussion, because it feels like you can save time by letting an LLM go, or like any AI algorithm go in your data and your solutions. But we know from experience that 70–80% of your data is just wrong, right? Like it's outdated, or it's not consistent, or duplicate. There's different ways you can describe that. So what I'm hearing is that the compelling driver for why now is obviously the developments that we've seen over the past couple of years, especially with Gen AI. But I think it extends even beyond that, Mohammed, to your point too, which is general AI algorithms and models that you train, right? Data models that you train in, giving them the facts that you already know and not let them figure it out on their own. Does that
exactly?
Go ahead, Mohammed.
Oh, go ahead, Polly.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, Lulit. You know, we've kind of thrown around like, why don't we just feed it our entire content corpus and train the LLM with it? And it's like, well, that's not quite enough, because, you know, in some cases, some of our content might sort of sound like stereo instructions. So, you know, that's really dating me. But you know, and you wouldn't necessarily want the LLM to speak in that way. So the fact that you do have a factual layer, an abstracted layer that can be used as an intermediary to guide sort of the brain of the LLM, still harnessing the speed of it, because I mean, that technology is amazing. The fact that someone can type in a question and they get an answer is revolutionary. But no, I think yeah, again, I just think it's really important to kind of have that intermediary layer, for sure.
Yeah, for me, on that point, it was just the reason why I was a fan of this well before the LLM timeframe was because I recognize that in large enterprises, and I think this is probably true of most large organizations, when they're trying to map all of their customer information together, and they've got a whole set of models that they want to go build on top of that data. You know, you want a highly scalable way to do that. And for me, I just said, well, now I can actually go build all of these, whether it's segmentation models, predictive models, Q&A type of questions. Like, there's so many different use cases. And so I actually felt that the semantic model, you know, this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, was really the underlying, you know, ultimately, again, not for every data product, but for many more complex data products, it's actually the foundation, is the way I saw it. It would be the way to build that data product. And at the end of the day, I don't know if business people understand what a data product is. But I've always thought that for certain types of data products, a semantic layer can be highly valuable, especially if that data product is one where there's a number of different data sources that you need to bring together. It's complex, Polly, as you mentioned, you know, tracking things over time. Maybe you're linking with some unstructured data as well. Then it certainly warrants that type of investment, so you can get a ton of use case value on top of it.
We may want to camp the data product conversation. That is an interesting rabbit hole into itself that I could probably rant for about an hour on. I'd love to get your perspective on that, Mohammed. But Lulit, to your point about the data being incorrect, well, you know, kind of my point about the governance elephant in the room when it comes to LLMs is that the governance that we are applying tends to be maybe around reference data, around master data, around things that are relatively structured, right? You're going to apply some sort of due diligence and verification validation around your supplier records, or your customer records, or your employee records. But the data that really isn't really well governed and well managed today is like the full text files that marketing created on the FAQs of a product, or in the case of Air Canada, the bereavement policy, or in case of HR, it's the employee handbook that is sitting on some production server that somebody forgot about, that a publicly facing LLM could go find. So it's all of that. How do you get your hands around all of that data? And how do you instead really kind of have your processes focus more on the data that is well governed and is well managed? And again, the jump between that data sitting in rows and columns into something that is meaningful is the graph is particularly good here. This is what Juan stumbled on, right? Which is the triples that are inherent to graph. You know, person buys product, you create a sentence. That's context. I now know that person buy product. That's a lot better than just, you know, individual snapshot of a record in a row or in a column.
Yeah, and I think Malcom, Mohammed, you both referenced, you know, Juan Takeda is a long-term partner, and you know, one thing we always, so when we get together, talk about is, especially when you're comparing with like traditional modes of doing this, sometimes you don't even need to know the question ahead of time, right? You may not even know the question you're going to ask. So that's, I think, the core value proposition here is if you are able to understand and map your data and encode the facts, then you can ask the questions of tomorrow. You don't need to know the joins now. So that's, I think that's one thing that, as we're talking about, his ears must be burning, but we always talk about. So while we're on this, I actually want to look ahead before we jump into audience questions and wrap up with one question for all of you, which is what comes next? What are you excited about in terms of, you know, how you plan to either utilize semantic solutions or advanced capabilities? What emerging trends do you foresee impacting your strategies? Would love to hear more. Polly, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I've probably talked about this the whole time I was here, but we're just very excited to be able to kind of, you know, get to more of a modern experience, a more engaging experience for our end users, who are patients and the clinicians who work with them. And so I think it's really exciting for, you know, we're embarking on, you know, creating sort of an MVP solution that will actually start to, you know, implement sort of action-oriented search that is based upon some of these technologies we're talking about, LLM combined with, you know, vector search and things like that. It's really allowing us to kind of take the content and the information that we've been trusted for decades, and being able to kind of operationalize that in a way that is really meaningful, really targeted to the patients at the time that they need it. And I think that's really the most exciting thing for us right now, is that the technology is mature and ready enough for us to be able to kind of dive into that world and really leverage it to make some exciting impacts on patient health.
Malcom, I know I really enjoyed our recent conversation on your podcast, CDO Matters, when we were talking about next-gen semantic layers. I would love to hear your thoughts here as well.
Yeah, what I'm most excited about tends to lean kind of on the conceptual, higher level stuff. I would argue over the last few years, potentially the data organizations, data and analytics organizations have drifted a little bit too far away from the business. We've been managers of data and providers of reports, but we are not viewed as strategic business consultants. And I think that this focus on knowledge that is enabled through semantic layers, this focus on knowledge, this focus on wisdom and telling the business things they don't otherwise know and that they can drive real value from, will position us closer to the business, which is where we need to be. We need to be in a place where the business comes to us and says, hey, I'm thinking about A, B, and C, but I haven't kind of put my hands around this. Could you really help? Could you make some recommendations? Can you tell me where we should be looking for the most profitable suppliers of our goods or the most profitable customers? We've been doing that, I would argue, kind of onesie twosie. Maybe we make a really, really great machine learning model that can help do some prediction for the business that they find valuable. But writ large, I think we need to move closer to the business and become business consultants. The way we do that is through this focus on knowledge.
That's spot on. Mohammed, what about you?
I think it's very much aligned with Paul and Malcom. You know, one of the things I feel like sometimes data teams live in a bit of a bubble. We use a lot of our language. We talk about our tools. We're excited about that, right? And we're excited about semantic layers because it's cool and it's, you know, it's innovative and so on. But when you actually do an X-ray on most organizations, data professionals often make up 1%, maybe 2% of the entire organizations, often in some organizations less than that. And as we look at economic headwinds that a lot of organizations are facing, a lot of folks ask the question, hey, this team is really good at writing SQL and creating these charts, but do they really understand my business? Are they really coming to me with valuable insights? And it turns out the skill of hypothesis-driven problem solving is a very different skill than writing Python or SQL. It's not really even taught very well anymore, unfortunately, in a lot of the boot camps. But that's really the critical piece, is how do you have problem solvers? And to become a problem solver, you have to sit with your business teams. You have to understand what drives customers to sign up for your product. You have to understand, why are you losing customers? What are your competitors doing? You know, you have to actually build a good understanding of the business by just asking questions, and being willing to ask those questions, and then being a thought partner. And I think more than anything now than ever before, I think that's what organizations are looking for from their data and analytics teams. They're looking for thought partners. They're looking for people who can add value. And I think just on the topic of semantic layers in particular, I think we need to take those baby steps. I love looking out into the future, but I feel like this is the moment to start to say, let's actually, you know, let's not look too far out. Let's not look 5 years out on, you know, the all seeing, all dancing AGI. Let's just actually bring this to life, because there's been a lot of conversation on this topic for many years. Let's actually get a couple wins under our belt.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, Paul, you called it, you know, the technology is getting there. In the past, it was, we didn't have all these tools and solutions to make this happen, to scale it. But I'm excited to hear the balance between the tech is there, we can leverage it, but also to Yoel's point around how we need to be closer to the business and solve real business problems. So this has been great. I know, Madeline, you've been monitoring questions from the audience. Do we have any you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lulit. This has been some great conversation. And as a reminder, if anyone from the audience has questions, you can submit them in the question box. I'd like to go ahead and start with this question. Few organizations have a chief knowledge officer, so how can we change this? And as a second part to this question, I'd like to ask my own question, which is, in your experience, what other types of roles besides a CKO or a CDO have you seen advocate for a semantic layer? And Malcolm, I'll put you on the spot and see if you want to do this.
Rightfully, because I was the one that came up with kind of the chief knowledge officer thing in real time. I think it's baby steps, right? Is changing our title, or is adding one more vowel to our title from CD, A, I, O, is that really going to change anything? No, and our customers see right through that, by the way. But I would argue baby steps, right? Mohammed talked about data products. Go hire a product manager. Go hire somebody whose job it is to stand over the shoulder and watch somebody input new sales records into your CRM. Position yourself as close to the business as you possibly can. Get to know the business incredibly well as they know it, or maybe even better. There are baby steps that you can take around MDM if you're not focusing on MDM. There's baby steps you can take around implementing knowledge graphs if you haven't already done that. So there's a lot of things that we can do to start positioning ourselves more along the lines of a chief knowledge officer, simply, and it's not about changing a title. It's about taking more of an outcome-driven approach. It's about understanding the business. I love what you're saying, Mohammed, about, you know, kind of being an advisor, being a thought leader for your business. Take some of those baby steps so that in another year or 2 years, you'll actually have a customer that says, "Wow, I've got a data and analytics team that is telling me things that I didn't otherwise know about my business."
Great. Mohammed or Polly, anything to add to that before we move to the next question?
I think you did a great job covering it, Malcolm.
Thank you.
Great. Is someone going to say something?
I just said I agree.
Great. So our next question is around Gen AI. So can we use the Gen AI platforms to create our semantic metadata schemes and knowledge graphs? So Polly or Mohammed, either of you want to take a crack at that?
So I think, yes, I think we can. I think it's just like any other software development, right? Like, I think you have to, you can use them as tools to sort of help you build out, you know, different schema and things like that to kind of get ideas. But I think I don't think that you should use that as your sole. You shouldn't sort of ship that code the minute it comes out of the LLM. But I do think that there are ways that you know, you can kind of use that more advanced technology to be able to help you get a starting point. I mean, you see that in other applications like Copilot and different things like that are sort of assisting people with developing code. But I think you're going to still need a human being to be able to say, are those truly logical connections? And And you're really going to have to still, rely on your subject matter experts to kind of test it and validate it and make sure that you have, make sure that you're sort of defining things in the right way. But I absolutely think that you can give yourself a really good head start by leveraging some of that technology.
Maybe I'll just add to Polly's point. I mean, I kind of see two different domains of data, right? Structured and unstructured data. And on the structured data, you can turn an LLM loose. You can give it some of your metadata, like your column name, a couple sample, and it'll try to tell you what the data is and what it thinks it is. But there's also a lot of information that sits outside your data, where it came from, how it was produced, right? What other joins happened, right? So if you have good lineage data, maybe you can pass it in. But on some of those, I think you're taking a little bit more of a risk than you might really recognize. Like, it's nice, it comes up with a description, but as we know, like, even when you ask it questions to join data sets together and answer simple questions, it doesn't do a good job. And so maybe it can help being a 20% starting point, but I wouldn't really trust it to do much more than that in describing your structured data. On the unstructured data, I think it becomes a lot more interesting, where you can start to, and Polly probably has much more experience than me on this, but where I've seen some of this is actually going and identifying facts and relationships, and then almost creating self-building, if you will, knowledge graphs. Obviously, there's some risk there. As Paul, you mentioned, you have to make sure those relationships are really there and they make sense and so on. But the good news is that with that, you can go back and you can cite kind of how this relationship was built, what was the source, etc. And now you've got ways of taking an unstructured corpus of data and really analyze it in a more structured way. But Polly, I'm interested in your point of view on that.
No, I absolutely, just to kind of give you a tangible example, worked with a lot of different types of tools that are used to kind of auto tag content, even though you sort of have to train them. And I think what's intriguing about LLMs is I feel like they make it not as hard to have to set up something that can interpret that unstructured data to pull concepts out of it. And I know that, that's not exactly what we've been sort of talking about today, but auto annotation is, and annotating content is a very labor intensive process. And to kind of see that you can leverage some of this LLM technology to be able to do that more quickly. And the training burden is not as heavy. As well with some of this technology. So yeah, I would definitely agree that there's some really exciting, just exciting in terms of being able to speed up a process that for me has been kind of a manual process over the years. So again, I don't know if that's kind of what you were looking for, but I do, I do see LLMs being very good at kind of processing that unstructured data and really making it usable, and relating it to your taxonomies and your different, sort of knowledge models. So.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing on your question, Mohammed and Polly, is that there's some sort of augmented capabilities that you can get from LLMs. In a way, it's a symbiotic relationship. You can use LLMs for areas that make sense to augment your semantic layer development and vice versa, right? Use semantic layers to encode text, facts, and all of those. I think the core thing that's standing out is you can't automate the whole thing. You still need a human to validate. And I think this goes back to buyer beware. This is not something you can press play and it automates itself. So I loved the analogy that Malcom you gave earlier. This is a 4-layer cake. Sadly, they don't make them anymore as good as they used to, those 4-layer cakes. But the promising future is that we have the tools and solutions living up to this, and there's an opportunity here. I know we are just about to hit time, so I really wanted to thank you all for the wonderful discussion. I am sure this conversation has given our audience perspective on how we can, harness the power of semantic layers and these solutions, and really reshape the way we think about not only how we interact with our knowledge and data, but also our roles, right? Our individual roles within the organization. So thank you for that. And Madeline, over to you if you want to close us out with any asks.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thank you to our speakers for your insights and stories, and thank you all who attended who attended this webinar. We hope it was valuable. As you'll see in the chat, our next webinar on the semantic layer is this Thursday, April 25th from 3 to 4 p.m. EST, so same time as this. And it will be a technical deep dive on the architectural components and technologies that power the semantic layer. So you can click that link in the chat if you're interested in registering, especially if you have some more technical questions, or you can check out our LinkedIn page, Enterprise Knowledge, for more information. So thank you all again.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brent.
Bye-bye.